All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's AVA Fusion Friday. My name is Alex Alvarez, application engineer here at KETIV Technologies. So happy Friday, everyone. Hopefully, everyone's having a pretty good day today. Again, thank you for joining us. If you are new to Fusion Fridays or this is your first time, again, Fusion Fridays is really just a series of webinars where we go over all the workspaces that Fusion 360 has to offer. So we do like to really have some diverse topics, switch it up here and there, and of course do updates or webinars on any updates that Autodesk has for Fusion 360. So for today, we are going to be talking about working with non-native file types. So this is a pretty big deal, right? Especially if you're a job shop or maybe you're just working with some sort of an outside vendor. They're always going to be sending you some sort of file that may not be compatible with your software. It's just not the same software that you're working with. It happens more times than not, and it's one of those things where you can't just go to the customer or the vendor and tell them, hey, you know what, I can't work with that file type. Can you please send me a different, a file type that my CAD software, CAD package is compatible with? I mean, that just looks bad overall, and it just really doesn't work, right? So hopefully today we can shed some light on, on that topic and show you guys how to work through that. So it is going to be a relatively straightforward webinar. Again, we're going to just jump straight into it. If you guys have any questions, just feel free to leave them in the the Q&A section there for inside of Zoom. So again, feel free to ask questions along the way. I'll do my best to answer them as I'm running through this webinar, but if not, I'll get to them at the end of the webinar here. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right into Fusion and get started. All right, so if this is your first time even looking at Fusion 360, again, pretty intuitive workflow or workspace that we see here. There's not a lot going on. It's pretty intuitive, like I said, pretty straightforward to kind of jump in between workspaces. So if you see here, we have our model workspace. We have all of our commands that are associated with the model workspace. If at any time or point in the in kind of my workflow, I want to switch between manufacturing or simulation, I can just do so quickly by hitting the drop down there, right? So notice that now my commands do change, and now I have commands that are associated with the manufacturing or the CAM workspace in this case. So again, model workspace, we have commands that are going to be working with the actual model environment. Over here on our left-hand side is our data panel. So again, I'm inside of a project right now. If I ever want to go back and kind of see the kind of the latest or the most up-to-date projects that I've been working with, just make sure you go to the very back, and you'll know that you're in the the main data panel, because you'll either see your name up here, or if you're a part of a Fusion team, some sort of a team site, then you'll see your team or your company name up here on the top left. And here you're going to see all your projects. So typically I like to create projects based off of customers that I work with, maybe just pretty big projects that I'm working with as well. I just create a project and I leave them on there. Nice thing about that is that you can always invite customers or vendors or other users to those projects, and then start sharing data, right? So that's one of the biggest benefits of having Fusion 360 is that you no longer have to use Dropbox or use some sort of a data sharing or file sharing site. You can ultimately just share files, have the most up-to-date data inside of Fusion 360. So pretty nice, pretty neat tool to just always be connected with one another. And here you also see that you do have samples. So if this is your first time, I highly recommend, kind of looking through some of these samples, some of these training samples. They are very beneficial, and they'll definitely do a good job in walking you through the basics here. But anyways, for today, like I said, we're going to be talking about working with non-native files. One of the most common questions we get is, well, what kind of files does Fusion 360 work with, or what kind of files does it take in, or can you upload into the software? Well, that's a pretty easy answer there, right? If you go to upload, select file here, you click on the little drop down and you're going to see all the different files that you can import into Fusion 360. So again, if you're ever wondering what file types you can bring in here, go to upload, select files, and then look through the list here. I'm sure there's a list online somewhere as well. But if you have the software open, just make it pretty easy for yourselves and look inside of the drop down list here. So in here, I already have a few few file types. So I will be uploading a file, but that's going to be later down the road. So for the first one, if I click on the little drop down here, I'll see that I'm working with a Solidworks part. So click on this, opens up the Solidworks part. You know, it even brought in the same, you know, kind of the same color scheme that they were using, and pretty, you know, pretty straightforward process here. I mean, it's a solid body. We can tell that it's a solid body if we go to inspect, do a section analysis here. If we go ahead and turn on the origin, let's say we want to use, you know, this plane here, we can see that it's a solid body, right? So that's good. Now, what that means for you is that if you're either going to use this bracket to create some sort of a, you know, a CAM toolpath, maybe you need to use it to create a setup, or even just to reference, you know, another part, or maybe you're just going to be creating, just using it as a reference for other components that you're going to be making, you're already ready to go, because again, it's a solid part. You can either start bringing it into a actual assembly, or just start creating it right off the bat inside of this design workspace. Now, what I want to show though, and the reason why I want to show this is because it's one of the most common questions that I get asked is, well, I want to make edits to it. You know, I don't see the sketches, I don't see the extrusions, the fillets that were used or manipulated to create this specific model. Well, you really don't need them in this case, right? So what you can do is what we call direct edit. So again, we have the model here. Let's say, you know, for whatever reason, we wanted to maybe just extend the height a little bit here. What we can do is if we go to modify, under the modify tab, we have the press pull option. And notice that there's, you know, the hotkey for that is going to be the Q key on our keyboard. Go ahead and hit modify, or the press pull command, select the face, and now we can see that it gives us a little option here, right? So you can either drag the handle, or we can say, okay, well, we want to increase this by 5 millimeters. And it just made it larger by 5 millimeters, right? So now you don't have to go back to the customer and tell them to send you a brand new revision. If you know that this part is going to change by 5 millimeters on that face, then do it yourself, right? I mean, it saves time, it saves having to go back and forth with the customer, and it's just a more streamlined workflow here. Same thing for holes. If we want to go ahead and do another press pull, let's say we want this one to be, you know, let's say, I think it was minus 2 millimeters, 3 millimeters, right? So you can start changing diameters here based off of some sort of an input here. Another thing that you can do is start removing features. And one of the biggest things that, you know, that I've noticed actually is maybe a lot of customers, or a lot of job shops actually, they don't want the fillets necessarily there. Reason being, sometimes the you know, the software works a lot better without having the fillet. Just by knowing that you have a fillet there, you can automatically use like some sort of a bullnose tool, and it's gonna, you know, it's gonna create that fillet for you. So you really don't need the fillet. Sometimes it's just there just to show that it's there. But again, if you're gonna manufacture, maybe you don't need these internal fillets. So what you can do, and this is gonna be a good segue into what I'll be talking about next, but you can just select the fillets. In this case, let's say we don't want the internal fillets along this face. I can go ahead and hit delete, and it's going to automatically delete those fillets, right? So now if, you know, you can create your toolpath, generate some sort of a toolpath that's going to be for the internal pocket here, and then you can either go back and create the fillets again. So we can click on the edge. Now let's say it's going to be a 2 millimeter fillet, and it creates that fillet for us, right? So notice what I had to do there. I had to individually select the faces there. And I believe, yeah, so Autodesk Inventor has the option to actually select tangent faces. And I was, you know, as I was going through this demo, I was like, well, I wonder if Fusion 360 has that option. And you know, I was looking through a couple websites, a couple forums, and I don't think it's available yet. But what I did want to show you guys though is, you know, that's a good idea. That's something that can definitely help out if you're, you know, if you need to delete faces, or maybe you need to select, you know, tangent faces or surfaces. What you can do in that case is, if you go over here to the top right where it says help, go to community, idea station, and it's going to bring up the idea station, right? So essentially what the idea station is, you can actually provide ideas or provide some of the inputs that you want to see kind of built in or implemented into the software. Autodesk is going to take a look at that. And of course, if you have, some sort of if you have a decent amount of upvotes, then Autodesk is going to take that either into consideration, or if you do have a great amount of upvotes, then they're going to start implementing that into the software. So quick look, I just did a tangent surfaces here, and we can see that right off the bat, someone already added this to the idea station. You can click on it and you can kind of see a brief description of what they were trying to look for. So we'll just wait for this to load. Many times you want to select all surfaces that are tangent. So that's exactly what I wanted to do in this case. He provides some pretty good details here. And you can see that I voted for this today, actually. So, it's under future consideration. So once it's actually set to implemented or accepted, then that's a good telltale sign that, Autodesk is actually working on it. And they're going to be trying to implement it into the next, update that Fusion 360 has. So again, just, a little sidetrack there, but it definitely helps out. And again, if that's something that you're looking for, maybe there's something that you want implemented in the software, definitely take a look at that. So another thing that I wanted to highlight. So if we go to community again, the gallery is a great tool, especially if you're trying to make something, or maybe you want ideas of, some sort of a model. The gallery has tons of different models that were created either inside of Fusion 360 or maybe even rendered with Fusion 360. So, if you're ever wondering, okay, well, can I create this model, or has anyone even been able to create a model like this inside of Fusion? Take a look at the gallery. Chances are you'll more than likely find what you're looking for inside of there. Same thing goes for the roadmap. If you're ever wondering what's next for Fusion 360, they do provide some pretty good details inside of the roadmap, right? So again, this one was working with the SolidWorks part, pretty straightforward. Either selecting faces, selecting features, and then either making them bigger or smaller. So there are some limitations. I mean, granted, we can't maybe make the one of these faces a little bit smaller, or so there's going to be some limitations to direct editing, but nonetheless, I mean, it's still pretty powerful that you don't have to go to the customer for small changes like these. Another thing too, so I made those changes. Maybe I wanted to go back. Notice that I don't have the option to go back, right? So whenever you're working with non-native files, and this is the first thing I always tell customers to do, is always right-click and capture design history. That way, if you make a change to the model and you ever decide to go back, you have the option to go back, right? So in this case, let's say we want to go ahead and press pull again. We want to select on this face. And again, you want to make sure that it's a new offset in this case, so that it starts from scratch, essentially. Make that 10 millimeters. And now you notice that it created that in the timeline, right? So if I ever want to go back, I can either delete the instance, or just go back in the timeline and look at the difference, right? So now you're just not limited to making a change one time, and then that's essentially it. So just quick tip there, just something to look out for when working with non-native file types. So reason why I actually picked the SolidWorks file was because that's a common one. I mean, SolidWorks is it's a pretty big competitor, and then a lot of people, even out of school or fresh out of school, they're using SolidWorks, so that's all they know. That's maybe all the data that they have. So you'll more times than not find customers or vendors that have SolidWorks or CATIA. I mean, even CATIA parts are pretty common as well. But they are going to be handled the same way inside of Fusion 360. So that's why I just wanted to highlight that kind of file type. Next one that I want to talk about is going to be IGES files. So click on the drop down here. We have an IGES file. Let's go ahead and open that. Another super common file type here. Now, again, we want to go ahead and make an edit. Let's go ahead and right click first, capture design history. And now we want to go ahead and, let's say, add a fillet, right? So we want to maybe add a fillet to the sharp edge. Notice that if I try to select the edge, it doesn't even want to select the edge. So why is that? If I go to inspect, do the same thing that I did for the SolidWorks file there. Take a look at what happened here, right? So IGES files are typically going to be just the surfaces that are, just the outside surfaces that are sometimes knitted together. So that's why you can't select an edge here and add a fillet, because again, it's a surface. There's no way that you're going to be able to add a fillet to, something that's not a solid. So how do we work around this? Well, if you did need to, make some sort of a change here, or maybe even 3D print this, you will need some sort of a solid body. Now, the key here is that the solid body has to be a watertight solid. What I mean by that is that you can't have any gaps inside of the model. You can have a hole, but again, the hole has to have kind of the internal wall in there or present as well. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to work, right? So process for this, instead of the model workspace, you want to go inside the patch workspace. And you want to go ahead and under modify, select the stitch option, right? So essentially what this is going to do is it's going to stitch the entire surfaces or the vertices together, and it's going to create some sort of a watertight solid, right? So let me go ahead and bring the dialog box over here. It's telling you, okay, which surfaces do you want to stitch? Don't try to select one by one here. Just do a window select going from right to left. Select the surfaces. Now, depending on how complicated your models are, it might take a little while, right? So you want to be careful as to, how many surfaces you have, because it can bog down the software a little bit depending on, how complex this model is. But anyways, when you see green here, that's a really good indication that it's going to be able to convert to a solid body. Not only that, you have the operation here, and it's telling us, hey, you're going to create a new body when you stitch this up. Is that what you want? We do. You can either join, all the surfaces, but in this case, that probably wouldn't help. I just want to make a new body in this case. You can play around with the tolerance. So if you did have, some sort of a gap that was maybe 0.2, 0.3, just increase the tolerance a little bit, but you do want to be careful, because otherwise, it's gonna try to create or join the two surfaces a little wonky there. So just be careful when playing around with the tolerance. Again, just by default, if it's a good IGES file, for the most part, it should work with the default tolerance here. So in here, I can go ahead and click OK. And again, this is a pretty intensive process, right? So again, depending on how complicated the model was, can take somewhat of a decent amount of time there. So now we're going to go ahead and do the section analysis, and now we see that we actually have a solid body created, right? So now we can go ahead and 3D print this. If we wanted to, if you wanted to maybe even machine somehow, you can go ahead and try to machine this. But nonetheless, you do have a solid body to kind of work with. Okay, so that was working with the IGES file, right? And creating the stitching for it. Again, biggest thing here is make sure that you have a watertight solid. So what happens if you have an IGES file, but you don't have a watertight solid, right? So again, let's go ahead and go through that same workflow. If we go to the patch workspace, let's try to go ahead and do a stitch and select our entire surfaces here. So again, it looks like we're working with some sort of a hub. Maybe you need this hub for an assembly, right? Maybe you don't even need to manufacture this, but you want this hub as an assembly. The vendor sent this over, and it wasn't quite behaving as expected. So here right off the bat, we can see that we have some issues, right? So we don't have the operation new body. Again, we can try to play with the tolerance a little bit, but I'm just gonna hold off on this one just for now. Why is that? Because it automatically highlights where the issue is going to be at, right? So we know that the issue, or we have some sort of an opening somewhere along this surface here. I'm going to go ahead and cancel. By the way, a lot of people ask, well, what happens if you hit OK? Nothing happens. Honestly, it's still going to be a surface. It's not going to create, half a solid body or something like that. It's just going to be a bunch of surfaces still. So again, we had, kind of the highlight, or it was indicating to us that we have some sort of an issue here. Now, I did this on purpose. I made a little split face here, and then I deleted this face. just to show you guys, how to kind of work through this. So this is going to happen, right? And I wanted to show that the software is always smart enough to highlight where the issue happens. So you at least have kind of a running start here when it comes to diagnosing what the issue is. So in this case, we have an opening. Who knows how long that opening is? I mean, again, we can play with the tolerance. But instead of that, what we can do is we can use the extend tool. And now we can say, okay, well, I want to extend the edge there. And it doesn't have to connect all the way. You can connect it, relatively close, as long as the tolerance there is going to meet. As long as, you get relatively close. Again, you can be a little bit more precise, but just for the sake of time here, get somewhere close there. Zoom out a little bit. And again, now let's go through that same workflow. Go ahead and try to stitch the solid up. And we now have, the operation as an e-body. So again, we can go ahead and click OK. Again, works either way. You can either play with the tolerance a little bit if you know exactly what that minimum gap is, or you can just, make the edits yourself. So again, if you had maybe some sort of a missing face here, you can either create that face, just make sure that it's a kind of a watertight solid here. And there you have it, right? I mean, pretty straightforward, working with file types. Again, so I did have these file types already kind of imported. Biggest question I get is, well, how do you even import into Fusion 360? So you have a couple options. You can either go to your data panel, and you can go to the upload. Again, you want to make sure that you're in the correct project here, right? So otherwise, if you're in a random project, it's going to want to upload to that specific project. So in this case, we want the Fusion Friday project, webinar 43. And we can go ahead and say upload, right? You can either drag and drop models into Fusion, or you can go ahead and select. In this case, I want to go ahead and select this DXF file. So I'm going to go ahead and open that and upload the DXF. There are actually a couple ways, now that I think about it, into how to upload a DXF. And that only goes for the DXF, and I think the SVG and a mesh. But if you go to insert, you do have a couple options in here, right? So you can insert a DXF, insert an SVG. So if you ever want to create some sort of a extrusion off of a logo, that's usually the workflow that you want to take, right? So you find the logo online, you convert it to an SVG, and then you bring it into Fusion 360. And the mesh, I know I use the mesh a lot for when I'm working with the stock simulation. So I'm working with multiple setups in the manufacturing workspace. Maybe setup one has a few toolpaths. I generate the simulation for it, and then I export the stock, and then I bring the stock back into as a mesh, so I can use for setup two. Right, so pretty handy tool here, insert mesh, and of course you can either import a background canvas, a canvas, something that guides you along the way to create the model, or even insert some sort of a decal here for your products. All right, so again, definitely take a look into these and try to explore some of these different options. But anyways, let's go back to that stand flat pattern. Click on this. So this is actually something that I generated from Inventor Nesting, right? So I used Inventor Nest, or the nesting utility, and then I created some sort of a nest of a stand that I had. That's oftentimes the workflow. So oftentimes you either have a nesting tool, you create a DXF, and then you just export it out to the to a vendor, someone that's going to actually manufacture this for you. In this case, let's say we're going to do this in-house. Our nesting tool just generates a DXF, and now we want to go ahead and machine or manufacture this using Fusion 360. So now what you can do is you can say, okay, well, now we can go ahead and extrude, and of course you can just select which ones you want to select, right? So just select a few of these just so you guys get the point. Probably this one right here too. In this case, you can say, I don't know, just extrude it a decent amount, maybe 12 millimeters or so. Take a look at that and then hit OK, right? So now we have our extruded flat pattern. Next thing what we can do is we can go to the manufacturer workspace. And now we can actually start creating our setup, right? So again, it's pretty straightforward here. Again, just selecting what models you want to use. At this moment, it doesn't know, kind of what to machine it. There's a couple models in here, a couple solid bodies, so the software still doesn't know what to manufacture in this case. So what you do here, and this is a pretty important step, you want to make sure that you select the entire bodies. So click on the first one, hold Shift, left click on the last one, and it automatically selects, all the 8 bodies there. And then your stock here. So obviously we know, the dimensions if it's already kind of giving us the outline on the outside. So you would just want to go ahead and make sure that you have the correct dimensions here. But anyways, after that, just make sure that your WCS is in the correct orientation. In this case, maybe the bottom left over here. Oops. I'm trying to click on the right one. There we go. And there's our setup, right? So again, pretty straightforward, and that, there's not a lot that can go wrong here, especially when working with the Nest. I know it seems a little tedious when you're clicking one by one, but you can do a left click drag, and then that would have selected, the entire profile. So you just do want to be careful with the internal profiles, but that's, kind of just one way that you can work with the DXF. So again, guys, it's a pretty straightforward webinar. I just wanted to show, this was more or less kind of answering some questions that we've seen along the way here with Fusion 360. So again, starting off with the Solidworks files, which again, it's going to be handled the same way as KETIV files or Pro-E files inside of Fusion. Working with IGES files, how to fix an IGES files, and then lastly, kind of working with the DXF. So again, straightforward webinar. Hopefully you guys learned a thing or two from it. Again, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and input them in the Q&A chat box there. So we'll give it a few seconds here. If you guys are watching on YouTube, or maybe this is a recording, again, thank you guys for watching. Yeah, also feel free to leave questions down in the comment section. All right, so we'll give it a couple more seconds here. It doesn't look like we have any questions. Again, so here's my email. If you guys ever need any help with Fusion or just want some guidance on the software, or really any software, I mean, we provide solutions for all of Autodesk software here at KETIV. Feel free to either reach out to myself or Nigel, who's a customer success manager. He'll make sure, to get the correct person to you guys. Let's see what we have here. And all right, so with that, I think Brian has the next webinar, and I think he's going to go over driving design. So pretty new functionality. Again, I know for on my end, I do want to go over some new functionality that was added to the manufacturing workspace. So if that's something that you guys are interested in, tune in to the to the next couple webinars. But with that, thank you guys for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.